The moment I heard my daughter-in-law say, "Once Elizabeth is out of the house, everything will finally be ours," my entire body went cold, like the blood had drained straight out. I was standing halfway up the stairs, one hand on the railing, when her voice drifted from the living room below, calm, controlled, almost cheerful. I wasn't trying to listen. I was only going upstairs to grab my cardigan because the house felt colder than usual that evening. But when I heard my name, my full name, spoken with such certainty, my feet stopped moving on there. I leaned back against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. "She's trusting, too trusting," my daughter-in-law continued into her phone. "That's why this will work." My fingers curled into the wallpaper, my nails scraping softly. I couldn't breathe. Each word felt deliberate, sharpened, as if she had practiced them. This wasn't frustration spoken in anger. This I had lived with them for 6 years. 6 years of trying to take up as little space as possible. I folded laundry, cooked dinners when asked, watched my grandson whenever they needed time alone. I paid my share, even when they insisted I didn't have to. I learned to walk quietly through the house, to close doors softly, to apologize even when I didn't know what I was apologizing for. I told myself that was what love looked like after loss. "She doesn't know about the documents yet," my daughter-in-law said. "Your brother says it's airtight. Power of attorney. Medical authority." Eve. My knees weakened. I sank slowly onto the stair, pressing my hand over my mouth. Documents. Authority. Words that didn't belong anywhere near my life, yet suddenly wrapped around it like chains. I had signed papers before, after my husband died, when grief made the world feel unreal and heavy, when my son said it was just routine, just in case something ever happened to me. I remembered nodding, barely listening, trusting the voice that sounded like my late husband's when he was young, trusting blood. I hadn't imagined those papers would be used to erase me. "She's only 55, the voice on the other end murmured faintly. My daughter-in-law laughed under her breath. "Exactly. People will think she agreed to it. Early placement, stress, loneliness after widowhood, it happens all the time." A sharp pain bloomed in my chest. Widowhood. As if losing my husband had turned me into something defective, something inconvenient. I thought of the man I had loved since I was 23, of the way he used to reach for my hand in the dark, of how his last words to me were, "You'll be okay, Lizzie. You're stronger than you think." I wondered what he would say if he could see me now, hiding on the stairs of a house I once believed was safe. "I just need her out before she starts asking questions," my daughter-in-law said. "Once she's settled, the house will finally feel peaceful, peaceful." The word echoed inside me, bitter and cruel. I had been trying to make that house peaceful since the day I moved in. I had swallowed my grief, my opinions, my loneliness, all in the name of not disrupting their lives. And still, I was the problem. I waited until her voice faded, until I heard her footsteps move toward the kitchen, before I forced myself to stand. My legs felt numb, my balance unsteady. I made it to my bedroom and closed the door quietly, then slid down against it, my back pressed to the wood like it was the only thing holding me upright. I shook uncontrollably. Not loud sobs, those would have betrayed me, but silent, violent tremors that rattled my bones. My hands fluttered uselessly in my lap, the same hands that had signed away my home, my security, my future. I wasn't naive. I knew relationships between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law were complicated. I knew I wasn't perfect. I was forgetful sometimes. I asked too many questions. I still cooked my son's favourite meals, even though she said it made her feel judged. But I never imagined this. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter downstairs. A television show. A normal evening. while upstairs my entire life was quietly being dismantled. Every strange moment from the past year replayed itself in my mind with new meaning. The way my mail had started disappearing before I could open it, the sudden insistence on handling my doctor's appointments, the gentle suggestions about assisted living slipped into casual conversation, always framed as concern. I had brushed it all off. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to believe my own family could betray me so carefully. By morning, my eyes burned from unshed tears, but something else had settled inside me, something steady and unfamiliar. Awareness. At breakfast, my daughter-in-law greeted me with her usual smile. She asked if I wanted eggs or oatmeal. She touched my shoulder briefly, affectionately, as if nothing had changed. I watched her closely now, the way her eyes flicked to my face, searching for signs, the way my son avoided looking at me altogether. "No oatmeal today," I said quietly. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calmer than I felt. "Just coffee." As I lifted the mug, my hands trembled again, but this time I didn't hide it. I let myself feel the weight of what I now knew, because once you hear the truth spoken aloud, even by accident, you can never unhear it. And that was the morning I realized I wasn't just living in their house anymore. I was living on borrowed time. I spent the rest of that morning moving through the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Every sound too loud, every step too careful. I washed my cup, dried it, placed it back in the cabinet exactly where it had always been, even though a strange thought kept circling my mind. Soon, none of this will be mine to put away, not even temporarily. My daughter-in-law left for work just after 9. She kissed my son on the cheek, reminded him to call the lawyer, then glanced toward the hallway where my bedroom was, as if measuring the distance between me and whatever future she had planned. I stood still, pretending to be absorbed in folding dish towels. When the door closed behind her, the house exhaled. Or maybe that was just me. My son lingered by the counter, scrolling on his phone. He looked older than his 32 years that morning, his shoulders slumped, his jaw tight. I waited for him to say something, anything, but he didn't. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. "Did you sleep okay, Mum?" he finally asked without looking up. I studied his face, the boy I had once held through fevers, the teenager who had slammed doors and then come back an hour later to apologize. I searched for some flicker of guilt, some crack in the wall he'd built, but all I saw was avoidance. "I did," I said, another lie. "Did you?" He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, fine, fine." The word landed between us like a closed door. After he left for work, I went into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. The room felt smaller than it used to. Or maybe I was just seeing it differently now, not as a place of rest, but as a temporary holding space. I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out the small folder where I kept important documents, or what I thought were important documents. My fingers trembled as I flipped through it. Birth certificate, marriage license, my husband's death certificate, papers soaked in memories and grief. But the documents my daughter-in-law had mentioned, the power of attorney, the legal authority, weren't there. Of course they weren't. I felt foolish for ever believing I had been included in decisions about my own life. Foolish for trusting smiles and reassurances instead of asking hard questions. Foolish for thinking love alone could protect me. I spent the afternoon pretending nothing had changed. I cooked dinner. I played with my grandson on the floor, building towers out of wooden blocks while he laughed and knocked them down. His laughter cut through me like light through cracks in a dark room. I wondered how long it would be before I was no longer part of his everyday life, before I became a voice on the phone, then a memory he barely recognized. That evening, as I tucked him into bed, he wrapped his arms around my neck and whispered, "Don't go away, Grandma." My breath caught. I held him tighter than I should have, pressing my face into his hair so he wouldn't see my tears. "I'm right here," I murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." I didn't know if that was a promise or a prayer. Later, alone in my room, I sat in the dark with my phone in my hand. I considered calling a friend, but I didn't know where to begin. How do you tell someone that your own family is quietly planning to remove you from your life? How do you admit that you might lose everything because you trusted too much? Instead, I scrolled through old photos. My husband and me on our anniversary, my son at graduation, holidays when the house was loud and full and mine. Each image felt like proof of a life I had earned, a life I wasn't ready to surrender. That night, sleep refused to come. I listened to the house again, to footsteps and laughter and doors closing. At some point, I heard my son and daughter-in-law talking in low voices downstairs. I didn't move closer this time. I didn't need to. I already knew enough. The next morning, I made a decision. I didn't announce it. I didn't confront anyone. I simply got dressed, picked up my purse, and walked out the front door, as if I were running errands. My heart raced as I drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles ached. I didn't know exactly where I was going, only that I needed answers, and I needed them before it was too late. I went to the small law office downtown, the one my husband and I had used years ago when we updated our wills. The receptionist recognized my name immediately. She smiled kindly, then hesitated when she saw my face. "I need to see my file," I said. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. All of it. There was a pause, a quiet exchange behind the desk. Then she nodded and led me to a small conference room. As she placed a thick folder on the table in front of me, my stomach twisted. I knew, before I even opened it, that this was where the truth lived. Page after page confirmed my worst fears. Power of attorney, medical decisions, financial authority, documents I had signed during the fog of grief, without understanding their full weight. Documents that gave control of my life to my son, and by extension, to his wife. I sat there for a long time, staring at my own signature, the ink bold and final. My hands shook again, but this time there was no basket to drop, no wall to lean against, just me and the reality I could no longer deny. When I finally stood to leave, something inside me had shifted. I was still afraid, still heartbroken, but beneath it all, a quiet resolve began to take shape. They thought I wouldn't fight. They were wrong. I sat in my car outside the law office for nearly 20 minutes before I could turn the key in the ignition. My hands were resting in my lap, palms open, as if I were trying to convince myself I still had control over something, anything. The documents sat in my purse like a weight I couldn't set down. Proof of my own disappearance, signed by my own hand. I didn't drive home right away, I couldn't. The idea of walking back into that house, of seeing their faces while carrying the knowledge of what they had planned for me, made my chest tighten until each breath felt shallow and incomplete. Instead, I drove aimlessly through streets I knew by heart, passing grocery stores, parks, places where ordinary life continued without pause. It felt cruel how normal the world looked while mine was quietly collapsing. I thought about my husband again, about how careful he had been with paperwork, how he used to sit at the dining table with his glasses low on his nose, reading every line twice. After he died, I had been so tired of decisions, tired of responsibility, tired of being strong. When my son told me he'd take care of everything, I let him. I wanted to rest. I wanted to trust. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows across the lawn. I sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. This was still my home, I reminded myself, even if the walls no longer spoke that truth. Inside, the house smelled like garlic and onions. My daughter-in-law was cooking, humming softly to herself. The sound made my stomach twist. She looked up when she saw me and smiled, the same familiar expression that now felt like a mask. "You're back early?" she said lightly. "Everything okay?" I searched her face, wondering how someone could be so calm while orchestrating another person's erasure. "Just tired," I replied. It wasn't a lie. I had never been more tired in my life. Dinner passed in a blur. My son talked about work. My daughter-in-law laughed at the right moments. I nodded when expected, answered questions politely, played my role. But inside, I was cataloguing everything. The way they exchanged glances, the way my daughter-in-law steered the conversation whenever my health came up, the way my son's foot bounced under the table like he was bracing for something. After dinner, I retreated to my room. I closed the door and locked it for the first time since moving in. The click of the lock felt both terrifying and empowering. I sat on the bed and pulled the documents from my purse again, spreading them out like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. Power of attorney, medical proxy, financial authority. I wasn't incompetent, I wasn't ill, I wasn't confused. But on paper, I had signed away the right to prove any of that. That was when the fear truly settled in. Not the sharp panic of discovery, but the slow, suffocating realization of how vulnerable I was, how easily I could be moved, medicated, silenced, how quickly my life could be reduced to a room that wasn't mine, a schedule I didn't choose. I knew then that confronting them directly would be a mistake. They would deny it, gaslight me, tell me I was misunderstanding, overreacting, being emotional. They would use my fear as evidence that they were right to take control. So instead, I began to plan. The next morning, I called in sick to the volunteer job I'd started at the library months earlier. I had taken it to feel useful again, to give my day structure. Now, it gave me something more, an excuse to be out of the house without raising suspicion. I spent that day quietly gathering information. I made copies of every document I could access. I wrote down account numbers I remembered. I opened a new email address, one my daughter-in-law didn't know about, and began transferring important correspondence there. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Still, the hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was the emotional weight of pretending nothing was wrong while knowing everything was. My grandson ran into my arms when he saw me, chattering about school and friends, and I smiled through the ache in my chest. My son hugged me goodbye each morning, his embrace stiff, uncertain. I wondered if he knew how close he was to losing me, not just physically, but in ways that could never be repaired. One evening, as I was sorting laundry, my daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed casually. "You've seemed distracted lately," she said. "Is something bothering you?" I met her gaze, my heart pounding. This was a test. I could feel it. "Just adjusting," I said. "Getting older does that to you." Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We just want what's best for you," she said gently. "You know that." "Right?" I nodded. Inside, something burned. That night I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, but this time I wasn't replaying her words in fear. I was rehearsing my own, not for a confrontation, not yet, but for the moment when I would finally speak with authority over my own life again. A week later, the first real sign came. My daughter-in-law handed me a brochure over breakfast. It was glossy, filled with smiling seniors walking manicured gardens, playing cards in sunlit rooms. "I thought you might like to look at this," she said. "Just options. No pressure." I took it from her, my fingers steady. The words assisted living were printed in elegant script across the front. I felt my son watching me closely, his jaw tight. I opened the brochure slowly, pretending to read. Inside, my heart was pounding, but my face remained calm. "Thank you," I said softly. "I'll think about it." As I closed the brochure, I realized something important. They believed I was still the same woman I had been. Quiet, accommodating, afraid of being a burden. They had no idea that the woman sitting across from them had already begun to fight back. I kept the brochure tucked inside my purse for days, not because I needed to read it again, but because it reminded me of what was coming. Every time my daughter-in-law smiled a little too brightly, every time my son mentioned my health in passing, I could feel the weight of that glossy paper pressing against my side like a countdown. They began introducing the idea slowly, carefully, as if easing a frightened animal toward a cage. "Wouldn't it be nice to have people around all the time?" my daughter-in-law asked one afternoon while chopping vegetables. "Activities, friends your age. You've been so lonely since Dad passed." Lonely. The word stung. I had been lonely, yes, but not empty, not incapable, and certainly not in need of being managed. "I like my routines," I replied, keeping my voice light. "The library, the garden, watching my grandson after school." She nodded, but her eyes didn't soften. "Of course, but routines can change." A few days later, my son joined in. He sat beside me on the couch, his body angled toward mine in a way that used to feel comforting. Now it felt strategic. "Mum," he began, "have you ever thought about what would happen if something happened to you? Like if you fell or got sick?" I looked at him then, really looked, at the crease between his eyebrows, the way his fingers twisted together. He wasn't cruel. He was weak, and that realization hurt almost as much as betrayal. "I think about it the same way everyone does," I said, "and I've taken care of it." His eyes flickered. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm capable of making my own decisions," I said calmly. Still, he didn't respond right away. He just nodded, as if storing the conversation away for later. That night, I locked my door again and pulled out my notebook. I had started writing things down. Dates, comments, small moments that might seem insignificant to anyone else, but I knew better now. Patterns mattered. Details mattered. A knock came at my door, soft, measured. "Yes?" I called. My daughter-in-law opened the door a crack, her expression gentle, almost apologetic. "I just wanted to check on you," she said. "You've been keeping to yourself." "I'm fine," I replied. She hesitated, then stepped inside without being invited. She sat on the edge of my bed, close enough that I could smell her perfume. "We worry about you," she said. "We just want you to feel supported." The word supported felt like a lie wrapped in silk. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I don't need decisions made for me." Her smile tightened. "Of course not. But sometimes family has to step in when someone can't see things clearly anymore." Something in her tone shifted then, subtle but unmistakable. A warning. I met her gaze. "Are you saying I can't see clearly?" She laughed lightly. No, just, you've been through a lot. Grief can linger." After she left, I sat very still, my heart racing. That was the first time she had openly questioned my competence, not directly, but close enough that I could feel the threat beneath it. The next week, everything accelerated. I came home from the library one afternoon to find my bedroom door open. My heart dropped. I stepped inside and immediately noticed things were different. My papers were out of order. My notebook had been moved. The drawer where I kept my copies of the documents was slightly ajar. I checked inside. Empty. My hands shook as I searched the room, but I already knew. They had been in here. They had taken them. At dinner, I said nothing. I watched them instead. My daughter-in-law avoided my eyes. My son barely spoke. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The following morning, my daughter-in-law announced that she had scheduled a doctor's appointment for me. "Just a checkup," she said, "to make sure everything's okay." "I didn't ask for one," I replied. "I know," she said smoothly, "but it's better this way." I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This was no longer preparation. This was execution. That afternoon, while they were both at work, I made the call I had been putting off. I contacted a different attorney. one recommended by a woman I trusted at the library. I explained my situation in careful detail, my voice trembling despite my efforts. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. "Elizabeth," the attorney said gently, "you still have options, but you need to act quickly." Those words lit something fierce inside me. Over the next few days, I moved with quiet urgency. I withdrew a portion of my savings. I secured my personal documents and stored them outside the house. I arranged for a medical evaluation with my own doctor, one who knew my history and my mind. I began the process of revoking the power of attorney. Each step felt dangerous, like walking a tightrope without knowing who might cut the rope behind me. But with every action, I felt a piece of my strength return. The day my daughter-in-law realized something was wrong, I could see it in her eyes. "You went to see a lawyer," she said that evening, her voice sharp. "Yes," I replied simply. My son looked between us, panic flashing across his face. "Mum, why would you do that without telling us?" "Because," I said, standing up straighter than I had in months, "I'm allowed to." The room fell silent. "You're being paranoid," my daughter-in-law snapped. "We're trying to help you." "No," I said quietly. "You're trying to control me." Her face hardened. "You're not well, Elizabeth." That was the moment I knew there was no turning back. Because when someone decides you're no longer allowed to speak for yourself, the fight becomes about survival, and I was done being quiet. The house changed after that night. Not in ways anyone else would notice, but I felt it in the air, heavy and watchful. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Doors closed more often. Even the simple kindnesses, the offers of tea, the gentle questions, disappeared, replaced by something colder, sharper. They were angry. My daughter-in-law stopped pretending. The warmth in her voice vanished, replaced by clipped instructions and thinly veiled impatience. My son drifted somewhere between us, avoiding conflict the way he always had, but now his silence felt like a betrayal all its own. 2 days later, she sat me down at the kitchen table. My son took the chair beside her. They looked united, rehearsed. "We need to talk," she said. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. "Go ahead." She slid a folder across the table toward me. "We're concerned about you," she began. "You've been forgetful, emotional, acting impulsively." I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to. "You mean hiring my own lawyer?" I asked calmly. My son sighed. "Mum, you're making this harder than it needs to be." The words cut deep, harder, as if my autonomy were an inconvenience. "We think it would be best," my daughter-in-law continued, "if you moved somewhere with supervision. Just for a while, to get settled." "There it is," I said softly. Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't a debate." I finally opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, even notes from my calendar. Evidence, or what they wanted to present as evidence. "You went to the bank alone," she said. "You moved money without telling us." "I don't need permission," I replied. "It's my money." "You're proving our point," she snapped. My son rubbed his face. "Mum, please, just listen." I looked at him, really looked. "Have you listened to me at all?" I asked. He didn't answer. That evening I packed a bag. I didn't announce it. I didn't argue. I simply folded my clothes and placed them inside my suitcase with careful precision. Each item felt symbolic. Another piece of my life I was reclaiming. When my daughter-in-law noticed the suitcase by the door, her face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "I'm leaving," I said, "for now." "You can't just leave," she said sharply. "We're responsible for you." I met her gaze. "No, you tried to be." My son stepped forward, panic in his eyes. "Mum, please don't do this." "I'm doing this because you didn't protect me," I said quietly, "and now I have to." That night, I stayed with a friend. Sleeping in her guest room felt strange, but also safe. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The next morning, I met with my attorney in person. We went over everything again. The steps I had already taken, the ones still ahead. You did the right thing by leaving, she said. Distance matters. Over the next week, my daughter-in-law called repeatedly. At first, her messages were furious. Then they became pleading, then threatening. She accused me of abandonment, of confusion, of tearing the family apart. I saved every message. My son called too, his voice heavy with guilt. She's just stressed, he said. You know how she gets. Yes, I replied. I do. When the doctor's evaluation came back, it was clear. I was mentally sound, capable, independent. The letter felt like a shield in my hands, but it didn't stop them from trying. One afternoon, I received a call from a social worker. She said concerns had been raised about my well-being, that a family member had reported erratic behavior. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully predictable. I'm not confused, I told her calmly. I'm being targeted. She listened. She asked questions. She took notes, and when the call ended, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Someone else could see it now. The confrontation came a week later. They showed up at my friend's house, unannounced. My daughter-in-law's face was tight with fury. My son looked exhausted. This has gone too far, she said. You're embarrassing us. No, I said, you're exposing yourselves. She took a step toward me. You can't win this. I smiled then, not cruelly, but with certainty. I already have, because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully you try to bury it. And I was no longer afraid of it. The final unraveling didn't happen in a courtroom or over some dramatic phone call. It happened quietly, the way all real consequences do, in offices and inboxes and official letters that carried more weight than shouting ever could. A certified envelope arrived at my friend's house one morning. My hands were steady when I opened it. Inside was confirmation that the power of attorney had been formally revoked. Every line felt like air returning to my lungs. I read it twice, then a third time, just to be sure it was real. For the first time in months, my life belonged to me again, on paper and in truth. When my daughter-in-law found out, her response was immediate. She left a voicemail so sharp it almost vibrated through the phone. She accused me of betrayal, of manipulation, of turning professionals against her. She said I was selfish, ungrateful. I listened to it once, then I deleted it. My attorney advised me to maintain distance, to let communication go through legal channels. It was strange, referring to my own son as a third party in my life, but the sadness I felt was no longer paralyzing. It had hardened into something more durable. Clarity. Weeks passed. My friend's house began to feel less like a refuge and more like a temporary home. I cooked dinners, I folded laundry, I laughed with her over morning coffee. Ordinary moments, stitched together, helped me remember who I was, outside of fear. Then came the call I had been expecting. My son's voice cracked as soon as I answered. "Mum," he said, "she's leaving." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, in a way. Not for what I'd done, but for what he was losing. "She says you ruined everything," he continued, "that if you hadn't fought, we'd still be a family." I inhaled slowly. We stopped being a family the moment she decided I didn't deserve a voice. There was a long silence on the line. I didn't know how bad it was. He whispered. I didn't answer, because that wasn't entirely true. He had known enough. The separation was messy. She moved out. Lawyers got involved. My name came up in arguments I wasn't present for. I stayed away from it all, focusing instead on rebuilding the parts of my life that had been put on hold. I found a small apartment near the library where I volunteered. It wasn't big, it wasn't grand, but it was mine. I signed the lease with a steady hand and felt something click into place inside me. When I walked into that apartment for the first time, sunlight spilled across the bare floor. I stood there with my keys in my hand and cried, not from grief, but from relief. Freedom has a sound. It's quiet. My son visited once, alone. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure of where he belonged now. We talked carefully, like people walking across thin ice. He apologized haltingly, without fully meeting my eyes. "I should have protected you," he said. "Yes," I replied. "You should have." We didn't resolve everything that day. Some wounds don't close neatly, but he hugged me when he left, and this time the embrace felt real. Months later, life found a rhythm again. Mornings at the library, evenings tending to my plants, weekends spent with friends who had quietly worried about me for longer than I realized. I still missed my grandson. That ache never fully went away. But my son began bringing him to visit, slowly, cautiously. I didn't ask questions. I didn't push. I just loved him when he was there. One afternoon, while watching him colour at my small kitchen table, I realised something profound. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. The woman who had overheard that phone call on the stairs, frozen, shaking, terrified, felt like someone I had known in another lifetime. She had been real. She had been wounded. But she had also been the one who chose to listen, to act, to fight. I thought about my husband again, about his voice, about his faith in me. He had been right. I was stronger than I thought. Time didn't heal everything, but it did give me perspective. A year passed quietly, marked not by dramatic milestones, but by ordinary moments that slowly stitched me back together. I learned the creaks of my new apartment, the way the afternoon light fell across the bookshelf, the exact time the bakery downstairs started pulling fresh bread from the oven. These small details grounded me. They reminded me that life could be gentle again. My daughter-in-law never contacted me after the separation was finalised, not once. I heard about her through fragments, mutual acquaintances, hushed updates from my son. She told people I had betrayed her, that I was manipulative, that I had turned cold after my husband's death. I didn't correct the story. For a long time, I felt an urge to defend myself, to explain. But I learned something important in that silence. People who are determined to misunderstand you will never hear the truth anyway. My son tried, in his own hesitant way, to rebuild what he had damaged. He came over more often. He stayed longer. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we didn't. I could see the guilt in him, how it sat behind his eyes like a bruise he kept pressing on. I didn't punish him for it, but I didn't carry it for him either. That was his work to do. One evening, after he left, I stood at my kitchen sink washing dishes and caught my reflection in the window. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me, not because she looked older, but because she looked steadier, grounded. There was a calm in her posture that hadn't existed before. I thought back to that moment on the stairs, the sound of my name spoken like a strategy, my hands shaking so hard I could barely stand. That version of me had believed love meant endurance, silence, gratitude at any cost. I know better now. Love that requires you to disappear is not love. It is control dressed up as concern. One afternoon at the library, a woman I barely knew sat beside me during a break. She looked nervous, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "My daughter wants me to move in with her," she said quietly. "She says it's temporary, that she'll handle everything." I looked at her, really looked, and saw myself reflected there. Uncertain, hopeful, afraid of being alone. I didn't scare her. I didn't preach. I simply said, "Ask questions, and don't sign anything you don't fully understand." She nodded, relief washing over her face. That was when I realized my story didn't end with me. It echoed outward, quietly, into other lives, into warnings, into strength shared without shouting. On my 56th birthday, I sat alone at my small table with a single candle on a slice of cake. I didn't feel lonely. I felt present, whole. I closed my eyes and made a wish, not for reconciliation, not for revenge, but for continued clarity, for the courage to keep choosing myself, even when it was uncomfortable, especially then, because I had learned something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Betrayal didn't break me. It woke me up. I thought the story was over once I found my footing again, once the papers were signed and the silence settled. I was wrong. Some endings don't announce themselves. They return quietly, asking to be faced one last time. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was watering the plants on my small balcony, the sun warm on my shoulders, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number, I had learned to protect my peace. But something told me to pick up. "Elizabeth," a woman's voice said, careful and professional. "My name is Karen. I'm calling from the assisted living facility you toured last year." My chest tightened. "I never toured a facility," I said. There was a pause. Papers shuffling. "According to our records, you were scheduled for intake, medical forms, financial guarantees, even a tentative move-in date." My knees weakened. I lowered myself into the chair by the door. "I didn't authorize any of that," I said slowly. Another pause. "That's why I'm calling. We're reviewing cases after an internal audit. Your file stood out," she explained gently, how the deposit had been paid, how documents had been submitted on my behalf, how my signature appeared but didn't match others on record, how something about it all felt wrong. After we hung up, I sat very still. The balcony felt suddenly smaller, the sky too close. Even after I left, even after I fought back, she hadn't stopped. I contacted my attorney immediately. This time, there was no panic in my voice, only resolve. We requested the full file, every email, every signature, every recorded call. What came back was worse than I imagined. My daughter-in-law had tried to place me anyway, quietly, discreetly, as if I were an object that could be shipped once paperwork aligned. The only reason it failed was timing. My revocation had gone through just days before final approval. Days. I felt sick, not with fear, but with the depth of her determination. How close I had come to losing everything without even knowing it was happening. My attorney was calm, methodical. "This crosses a line," she said, "and now we have proof." The word proof felt heavy. Final. I didn't celebrate when the legal notice was sent. I didn't feel victorious when the facility formally apologized. What I felt was grief, for the illusion I had lived in, for the family I thought I had, for the woman I had been before I learned how disposable trust could make you. When my son found out, he came over that night without calling first. He stood in my doorway shaking. "She tried again," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," I replied. He sat down slowly, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't." I watched him carefully, and for the first time I believed him. "She never told me," he went on. "I found the emails after she left. She was still planning." I closed my eyes. "That's why I had to leave," I said, "and why I couldn't trust either of you anymore." He nodded, tears slipping through his fingers. "I failed you." "Yes," I said again, not unkindly, not angrily, just truthfully. We sat in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke again, his voice was steadier. "I'm in therapy," he said. "I'm trying to understand why I let it happen." I looked at him then, not as my little boy, not as a disappointment, but as a man standing at the edge of his own reckoning. "That's your work," I said, "not mine." He understood that. I could see it. After he left, I stood alone in my apartment, listening to the quiet. I thought about how close I had come to vanishing, how easily it could have happened. How many women like me never realize what's being done to them until it's too late? That night I wrote everything down. Not for court, not for revenge, but for myself. The phone call, the documents, the fear, the awakening. I wrote until my hand ached, until the story lived somewhere outside my body. Because stories like mine don't end in neat forgiveness or dramatic triumph. They end in ownership. Months later, a letter arrived. No return address. I knew who it was from before I opened it. It wasn't an apology. It was an accusation. That I had destroyed her marriage, that I was selfish, that I had ruined her plans. Plans. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the bottom of a drawer, not as evidence, as a reminder. Some people don't see others as human beings, only as obstacles or assets. And once you understand that, you stop asking why. You start choosing yourself. On the anniversary of my husband's death, I visited the cemetery alone. I told him everything. The fear, the betrayal, the strength I didn't know I had. I stood there longer than I meant to, the wind cool against my skin. "I'm okay," I whispered, "I promise." And I was, because my life was no longer something happening to me behind closed doors and whispered phone calls. It was mine again, fully, fiercely, undeniably. I am Elizabeth. I am 55 years old. I overheard a phone call that almost erased me, and I listened. Thank you for staying with Elizabeth's story until the very end. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for giving space to a voice that almost went unheard. Stories like this matter because they remind us that strength can begin in silence, and courage can start with simply listening.